Before we get into that, make sure that you're heading on over to BangTheBook.com and checking out all the great content that we have over there, including our free pick videos from today's first guest, Brian Blessing, but lots of helpful articles over there, ranging from the daily NHL free picks from Parker Michaels to Doug Carson's NBA picks on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I put up a Tuesday how to bet article for tonight's Celtics versus Lakers game. We're going to have a ton of Super Bowl content. I'm going to start rolling that out here today. Put up the game preview. Also, the props coming out. Seems like they're coming out earlier than they have in the past. So I'll be writing my prop betting articles here this week as well. But we are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information over at BangTheBook.com. And while you're there, try out those contests that we have. Free to sign up. You'll win cash prizes in those. Just give us your email address. We'll shoot you a daily newsletter, and you'll be available to join those contests that we have going on over there. As I mentioned, two guests joining me here today on the program. The first, Mr. Brian Blessing from Sportsbook Radio. Brian, how's it going today?
Hey, Adam. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Good to hear your voice today. And I got to get something out of the way here real quick during our segment. I went up to Buffalo over the weekend, checked out the Sabres game, and my God, they played awful on Saturday. But I have to say, I went to Duff's. I went to Anchor Bar. I'm Team Duff's, man. I thought they were fantastic.
Yeah. Did you get a bocce?
I did not. But we didn't make it there, unfortunately. I was so full eating wings at two different places in the same night. But I did go to Paula's, and their donuts are good.
Yeah, well, the one thing that's beyond belief, literally, I try to be a nice guy every day, but I mean, I dirty looks at everybody. I mean, you get chicken wings out here, they throw ranch dressing at you. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, they're made, buffalo chicken wings are made to be eaten with blue cheese.
No, I completely agree. And for those that have no idea what we're talking about, Brian, a longtime Buffalonian, I went up there last weekend, as I've said on the show before, became a Sabres fan in high school, so got a chance to go up there to the game, and had to get wings while I was there. And
did you park at the Swanee House? Get a beef
I did
on
not.
Sandwich?
No, I did.
You got to go back.
I know. Well, that's fine. I'm always happy to have an excuse to go back up there. Hopefully, when I go, the Sabres play a little bit better. But for those that haven't had beef on Weck, beef on Weck is fantastic.
Oh, the beef on Weck's amazing. That or play Dallas on the puck line. I mean,
that's true.
That was a cupcake. Although I give the Sabres credit last night, their personal pride after and maybe that's a little lesson for the podcast here is, when a team has one of the most god-awful performances and they get booed off the ice and the coach calls them out and they get put through the ringer, even though they've hit the bottom of the barrel. These guys are professional athletes. They are playing for jobs and pride. Their next game, they went into Calgary last night and beat a red-hot Flames team in overtime. Eichel scored in overtime. So as bad as they looked last night, they were a big plus price, and you made money on them last night.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was the big takeaway that I had. And I've actually seen Dallas twice. When I was out in Vegas, I just happened to see Dallas there as well. And, I mean, they're just a really good team, especially with all that talent that they have up front. But, for Buffalo, like you said, I mean, kudos to them for rallying. I mean, that was a really depressing performance on Saturday. As you mentioned, booed off the ice after the second period. The stands were basically empty in the third period. But they did step up and played a really good team. And, sometimes it helps, too, to get out on the road, get away from the local media, kind of get away from, family and all that. You're just with your teammates. And I think that's a really key lesson here as well.
Yeah, and who they're not getting away for are the scouts. Scouts have been, I monitor this every night, in the press box, and certain teams have been following, specifically the Sabres, for a long time. Evander Kane's name has been out there to be a very valuable asset. It'll be available trade deadline. But now it's going to be a fire sale. So the scouts know this, and I do believe this, Adam. I think this trades will happen by the end of this week. We wait till the trade deadline. And you sit there, and sometimes it becomes this quiet day. You think all these things are going to happen. And in recent years, the bigger deals have actually been cut in advance of the trade deadline. The bottom line is you look at the standings, and the logjam of really, really good teams in the West is there. And in the East, there are teams that are kind of plodding along, but it's still this compacted schedule coming up, and it's a logjam in the standings. Some of these teams, Chicago's got to get a goaltender. and then there are teams that have injuries. Their season is in peril at the moment, and teams wait for the trade deadline. It's going to be too late. I think there's going to be some movement. I think, and when one trade starts, it's going to open the floodgates, and I do believe it's going to start this week.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've never fully understood why teams wait until right up against the trade deadline, because why wouldn't you want those assets for, 6, 8, 10 more games in the month of February? Why wait until February 26th when, then you may be paying a little bit lower of a price because you've got the player for a shorter amount of time, or you may be paying a higher price because there's more competition out there. Yeah. And I would hit the market early. I don't know why more teams don't.
Well, for all the reasons you cited, and another one would be you give them more time to get acclimated to know their teammates so that anything they're doing when the postseason gets here becomes second nature, and you lengthen out the transition period to become a good teammate.
No, that's true, too. And also, I mean, it's really hard to make up ground in the NHL. With that loser point for going to overtime, it's so hard to make up ground. So, again, I mean, I think it really behooves teams to be a little bit more aggressive here. And I agree. There's been a lot of smoke over the last few days in terms of on Twitter with guys that are available. I think you're right. I think things do start happening here over the All-Star break, which I guess since we're talking NHL, we might as well just go ahead and do it. We'll finish up with the Super Bowl here. Is that, Brian, as you handicap this week, and it is a little bit of a condensed schedule, as you mentioned, several teams playing 3 games in 4 days here, wrapping up on Thursday and then going to the All-Star break on Friday. Do you feel like you should handicap this week differently because there's that downtime that players are looking forward to?
I would think it'd be maybe more after the break, where we see teams get a little rusty after a break. But basically, we just did this. I mean, they've all basically just come off their collectively bargained 5-game bye, and teams had an element of rust coming off the bye. But one thing the league that was better than past years, for the most part, you had teams were coming off a bye, were playing another team that came off a bye. So they did a better job of that, because last year teams coming off the bye were 9-21. It's awful. You get rust, bad habits creep in, and especially teams that are playing really, really good. The last thing they want to do is take a break. So I'd maybe watch for teams that have, Colorado's been great, Calgary's been great. I would look at maybe after the All-Star break, look for maybe teams like that. Not that they're going to fall off the map, but I would look for them to come back to earth, teams like Colorado and Calgary.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, as you said, you start playing well, you get into that rhythm. You want to keep playing. You don't want to take that time off, especially if Calgary winds up running this winning streak up to 12 before the All-Star break. You know that they don't want to stop, and then you kind of sit there. It's a little bit harder to relax during that 5-day period because you're sitting there thinking, okay, when we get back, we got a 12-game winning streak to try and keep up. So, not necessarily an ideal spot for Colorado. And, of course, they may lose one of these next 2 games anyway. But, do you feel like there's a team out there maybe that could use the All-Star break to its advantage, either get healthier or, maybe get back on track after struggling a little bit?
Well, personally, I keep staring at Anaheim, and I think that this is a team, they're sitting there 22-17-9, but they're on the outside looking in. But I look towards the playoffs and who are teams that are constructed to be successful in the postseason. Anaheim strikes me always as that team. Now, the game is really a speed game. And Anaheim is not the fastest team. We watched Vegas play them. They skated rings around them. The difference is when you get to this time of year, and especially when you get to the playoffs, things just get ratcheted down. Teams start playing a real close to the vest kind of game. They chip it off the glass and out, and they're more of a counter-punching team, and they'll go – the mantra in the playoffs is, special teams and goaltending. Gibson's a good goaltender. Kessel, who's a great lockdown center. And then you get guys like Getzlaf that can raise his game. I think Anaheim as a team's going to have to make a deal or two. The one thing that makes them really dangerous for me is this is a team that can generate offense from the blue line. A lot of teams have a guy that can, be that offensive threat from the blue line. Anaheim's got a little mini army of guys that can jump in the play and create offense.
Well, if you look over at the Eastern Conference here, the Atlantic Division, those 3 playoff spots are pretty much decided. Tampa Bay, Boston, Toronto. Detroit's 12 points out. They do have 3 games in hand on Toronto, but they're not going to run down the Maple Leafs, I don't think, although Toronto's having some offensive issues here lately. The Metropolitan Division, though, is you got Washington up there with 61 points. They're in good shape. Then the rest of the teams in that division separated by a total of 6 points. New Jersey in second, Carolina last with 50. What do you think happens in the Metropolitan Division here? I mean, do you feel like there's a team that, in that sort of mid-range that can start to separate a little bit, or do you feel like this is pretty much, what we'll see going forward, where there's just not a whole lot of separation in the standings?
I think specifically that division, it's just like cannibalization. They'll just sit there and eat each other alive. At the moment, you got Pittsburgh tied with the Rangers, but through tiebreakers are the 9th seed right now. I think Pittsburgh is a team that's capable of making maybe a moderately significant deal. They're loaded with prospects in Wilkes-Barre. And I think we're seeing it with Chicago now. Chicago is, you've got Kane and Taves, but collectively the supporting cast is getting long in the tooth, and they're slow. And I think playing all that hockey takes its toll on you. And, we're seeing Pittsburgh right now. They've been making Stanley Cup runs the last 2 years. It takes a toll. That being said, you got young guys like Getzel and Sheary. These kids are young, and they'll be okay. But I think look for Rutherford to make a deal for Pittsburgh here to give them a little mini wake-up call. And don't forget, I mean, in past years, the guys that were monsters for them, when they won the Cup a couple of years ago, they went and they got Hagelin. And the third line was the key for them to win the Cup. Hagelin was one of the fastest guys in the league. Last year, Bonino was one of the biggest contributors. So it's not always this, a high-end blockbuster deal. It's the second, third, and fourth line. Well, I wouldn't go to a fourth line, but second and third line guys that can chip in offensively. Those are the deals that put teams over the top. So I'd really look for Pittsburgh to be making a move here of significance.
All right, let's spend a couple of minutes on Vegas. And I listened to you with Eric Lacroix yesterday on Vegas Hockey Hotline, and it was fascinating to me that you're somebody that covers this team day in and day out, and yet you're still kind of rendered speechless 46 games into the season at what they're doing. I mean, they're just a point away from having the top record in the NHL. They have a game in hand on Tampa Bay, so it could happen tonight when they host Columbus. But this is a really interesting 3 or 4 week stretch for Vegas. You've got the All-Star break where they get a chance to sort of realize what they're doing, kind of let it all sink in a little bit. They've got some interesting situations with guys on one-year deals. They've been giving out some extensions. This is just a really fascinating week for them, not just in terms of the playoff chase, but for the future of this franchise. So what are you getting from them overall? I mean, do you feel like they're going to slow down with so much going on, or is it just going to be business as usual on the ice?
I don't think they slow down. Well, I mean, we'll put it this way. I mean, they're not getting 60 points in the second half of the season the way they did in the first half. I mean, so I guess technically if it was slowing down, but I think this is a really, really good hockey team. We've talked in previous podcasts here some of the reasons why. It's like a perfect storm. You had 13 guys that were unrestricted or restricted free agents, so these guys are all in a contract year. Gallant's been able to mesh them together. There's a real true bond and a sense of camaraderie in the locker room. They're all really good guys. Every night they play, well, tonight, they're playing Columbus tonight. So this will be the first time, but every time they go to play an opponent, they actually get a scouting report in the room. Tonight, William Karlsson sits there going against his old team. So he gives them little scouting reports and little tricks and things that this guy does, that guy does, and then they rally around and play for Karlsson, his first time going against Columbus. It's just all these wild things that have just added up. And the fact that they're all, and it's not an insult to them, they're all playing some of the best hockey of their careers. I don't know if they're overachieving, but they're all playing as a highly motivated bunch. But they are lightning, and they are fast, Adam. I mean, they are one of the fastest teams in the league, and the true the one thing on a nightly basis you watch, and I think we were talking with Eric about this yesterday, is in a tie game with 3 minutes to go, Gerard Gallant comfortably will put the fourth line on the ice. And there are times the fourth line carries play against the other team's best player. So they get fresh players. They roll 4 lines. They're fresh even late in games. I could go on and on, reasons why. It's an amazing thing. I mean, people, well, the league made it so that they could, cherry-pick these guys. Well, these guys weren't doing any of this stuff with these other teams. William Karlsson had 18 career goals in 3 seasons He's got 25 this year before the All-Star game that he should be playing in. I mean, how do you handicap that?
No, you can't. And one of the things I've noticed about Vegas, in the game where I saw them, I mean, they played Dallas, and Dallas wound up winning that game. I think it was 3-0. But the thing about Vegas is that they outwork the opposition damn near every night. And that's something that Columbus used to do with John Tortorella. Now they've gotten to a point where I don't want to say they're fat and happy necessarily, but now that they've actually started to accomplish something, that work ethic element hasn't fully been there for this team. But I really liked what John Tortorella did, with the team looking at its first trip going out to Vegas. He said, I want the players to go and have fun. We're going to go out there early. I want them to go out. I want them to play a little bit guilty on Tuesday night. I think that's the right way to approach it, quite frankly. And I think tonight should be a real good one.
Oh, no, it should be a good game. And the other thing, there are a lot of angles that make sense. First game home from a long road trip's a tough game to play. So it's the first game home for a 4-game Eastern swing for Vegas. They went 2-1-1. And I like that approach by Tortorella. Try something different. Lamoriello locked the Leafs in a door, locked them in a room. That didn't work. Some teams came in for 3-4 days. We don't know. Did any of these guys go haywire? Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. The bottom line is you got to show up. And you got to play the game. And I would just say to you that all the things that make sense and angles that have worked forever and a day in hockey, you happen to be at one of the 4 games. They're 18-2-2 at home. That Dallas game, by the way, Dallas had their dad betting angle in the history of sports. That's when a hockey team has their dads on a trip with them. These guys play like men possessed. So it was one of the few nights Vegas had a bad game. The other team was playing it like a playoff game, the Dallas Stars, because their dads were on the trip. So, there's always an angle, man. There's always an angle.
Yeah, there really is. And I think hockey, maybe more so than any other sport, sort of lends itself to those types of things. When you talk about the nature of the schedule, the dad's trip, playing against former opponents, coaches going up against their former teams. I mean, we've seen it with Vegas, especially the game when Florida came to town. They were fired up for that one for Gerard Gallant. You certainly couldn't blame them for that. So lots of those little angles that maybe aren't necessarily quantifiable, but are definitely things that you want to use in your handicap in the NHL. All right, let's transition over to Super Bowl 52 here for a few minutes. New England, a 5-point favorite out there, pretty much market-wide, at least in terms of the offshores. Pinnacle and the Greeks still sitting 5.5. There were some 5.5s out there yesterday at some of the other books, but most of those kind of gone now at this point. Is this thing setting up as sort of a pros versus Joes type of game?
Well, and there's so much money bet on it. The general public gets involved so much more in this game. But one thing you got, it's sitting now in a dead zone. When you're at 5, 5.5, you're going to watch different properties. This thing go up and down, up and down, up and down. And then you have other places that have liability on the future book that may shade a number. So you're actually going to be able to, shop around a little bit here to determine what the best number is, that depending on the side you like in the game. Personally, when you get to 400 props in a game, I would say that, unless you have this monster opinion on the game, the way to go is the props. And I will say this, fortunately, it worked this past weekend in the Jags game. I had real doubts. I like Jacksonville. I know Brady's been getting hit a lot more than he has in the past. So I wasn't in love. I thought the number was inflated. But when I looked at the game, my handicap for the game, and it was the way I played the game, was we know Belichick always takes the opposition's best player away. So it stood to reason he was going to try and stop Fournette. The Bills stopped Fournette, and the Jags were lucky to beat them. So you're saying, well, if he's taking Fournette away, that means they're going to have to go to a controlled little short passing game to actually move the ball with the running game, was just little swing passes, and Bortles was going to have to throw. So the way I played the game was Bortles over 19 completions and over 223.5 passing yards. And it was actually my handicap of the game. And that was my opinion on the game, more than the game and the score, the side, or the total in the game. You get a bad bounce of the ball, now that game's going to go over the total. All of a sudden, Miles Jack comes up, makes a great play, and forces the fumble so the game stays under the total. But then there are moments in the game. We were watching the game. I do a thing out at Sunset Station with our buddy Andy Isco. We're sitting next to each other, and it was about 2 minutes to go before the half, and I said, Andy, the time is now. If you're going to do it, and it's amazing how the industry's changed where you think of in-game wagering. I said, They were down 4 at the half, so they were down 11 at the time, and they were getting the ball back before the half. As the time is now to play New England on the money line, because that ship is going to sail. The time is now, and sure enough, they went down the field and got a touchdown before halftime. But you were getting like plus $1.65 or whatever for the Patriots to win the game. But it was now you got to think about in-game wagering and your handicapping as the game goes along too.
Yeah, and then there should be a lot of that for the Super Bowl, especially because of what we saw in last year's Super Bowl and how many opportunities there were, to take the Patriots for that comeback, or if you wanted to take the Falcons side thinking that the game was pretty much done, you had opportunities like that too. But I really love what you were talking about there with Jacksonville and with the Blake Bortles props, because, this was a 24-20 game. There were no ridiculous yardage totals or anything like that. But as you said, New England's probably going to take Leonard Fournette away. For the most part, they did. 3.2 yards per carry. He did have a touchdown, but his longest carry, 14 yards on the day. So for Jacksonville, it was about Blake Bortles. And you see Corey Grant, 3 catches for 59 yards out of the backfield. A lot of dump-offs, as you mentioned. That's my favorite thing about the Super Bowl, is trying to figure out how these coordinators are going to play it. And a lot of times when you get to a Super Bowl, you've got teams that are loaded with skill position talent, so you have a lot of opportunities to look around for prop betting values. And I completely agree. That's definitely the way to go.
But this game, that one instantly, I will tell you instantly, after Jacksonville beat Pittsburgh, that was my thought process for the next game. I'm looking at this. I'm going to need every minute leading up to this game. You look at Philadelphia, you got 2 weeks for Belichick to prepare for Foles. So he's going to try to do something. He'll do something to disguise and mask and frustrate Foles. But when you look at Philadelphia, I don't know what is their best thing. 1 week it's Aguilar, 1 week it's Ertz. It could be a Jai. It could be Blunt. It's like an offense by committee. It becomes a real challenge to sit there and say, what is Belichick actually going to take away from the Eagles? I don't know that there's any one thing.
No, that makes sense. And what's also interesting here about this game is that you've got this Philadelphia front four that gets a lot of pressure on its own. They don't have to do a lot of exotic blitzes or anything like that. So they've got a lot of those guys back there in coverage in the back seven. That's something that kind of limits what New England does really well in terms of finding Gronk up the seam, assuming he's cleared to play, and he probably should be. But also the way that they use their running backs in the passing game. So it kind of makes you wonder, what Josh McDaniels is going to come up with as well.
Yeah, no, from a prop perspective, this one is really kind of a Rubik's Cube because, 1 week to the next, here's the thing, that when Gronkowski's in the game, he is a red zone machine, and he is he's a mismatch nightmare for New England, which then opens the door for the underneath stuff, be it Amendola. Other than that, without Gronkowski, they have diminutive wide receivers. It was pretty impressive that once Gronkowski was out of that game, New England was still able to get enough points to get it in the end zone enough. Once Gronkowski was out, because they are seriously a completely different offense when Gronkowski's not in there.
Now let me ask you this here about the actual spread for the full game with New England favored by 5. A lot of the look-ahead lines had this game 6.5 or 7. So, right now you're kind of protecting against the Gronkowski injury. Like I said, I think he's probably going to play. It'd be really hard to see him, sitting out here, whatever New England has to do, whether it's on the up and up or not. Gronkowski's probably going to find a way to be out there in this game. But you had New England struggle with Jacksonville, and you could make a case that if Jacksonville doesn't get overly conservative in the fourth quarter, we're talking about Philadelphia versus Jacksonville here. But you had Philadelphia, who played extremely well against Minnesota, 38-7, almost wire-to-wire job in that one for them. So Philadelphia looked good. New England really didn't. We go from a 6.5 or 7 look-ahead line to the 5.5 that we're seeing out there now. Is that justified, or do you think that we're seeing a little bit of an overreaction to last weekend's action?
Well, it's a been there, done that thing. It's just New England in the Super Bowl again. They know the routine. They're comfortable. Philly did. It was amazing what Philly did. They made Minnesota look bad. But don't forget, it was a home game. And, so now it's a neutral field, albeit the majority of the crowd likely will be rooting for Philadelphia. By the way, you talk about one that falls through the cracks. I did not see this one, and like I said, I'll be doing videos for Bang the Book, and we'll break down a lot of the props and a lot of the things leading up to it. But as much as you try to, and this is one that was a simple one. I'm hitting guys that are sitting at the table I'm at. But look at this. They threw the graphic up to your lives that indoor teams, they put it up at the time, was 0-12. Now it's 0-13. Indoor teams playing outside in a championship game are now 0-13. Like, I wish I knew that before the game.
Wow. Yeah, there's no way I would have thought it would be that lopsided, but I mean, I guess
13 now. Indoor teams, mark it down, write it down for the rest of your life. Indoor teams playing outdoors in a conference championship game are 0-13.
That is crazy. It is absolutely crazy. Now, let me ask you this then. In terms of looking at this game here, which will be played indoors, and obviously Minnesota would have been the home team had they beaten Philadelphia, do you feel like that indoor environment favors one of these two teams? A lot of times people like to talk about the fast track. You don't have to worry about your footing as much. Do you feel like that favors one of these two sides here or not really?
Well, I mean, we put it this way. It takes weather out of the equation. So whatever you're thinking in terms of pace of play, you're taking a huge factor out of it. So, I think the other thing you do is you break down games. You remember the big comeback last year with New England against Atlanta. These teams make adjustments at halftime. In the beginning of the game, even New England will have jitters and nerves. It seems like the second half of these games, whatever adjustments they make, lend themselves to seeing more offense. And then, like you said, and it was crazy. And I know it's human nature, but coaches drive me nuts in football. I mean, the way they burn timeouts and just throw them away. But literally, you're sitting there at the end of almost towards the tail end of the third quarter, and you could see Jacksonville starting to play the clock and getting conservative. And you're like, don't change anything. You're throttling the guy. Keep knocking him on the seat of his pants. Don't go to this thing. It took them 6 minutes to score. Well, don't change anything. They wouldn't have scored. But when you were watching it, you're sitting there going, you're just playing with fire. I mean, Jack, you got a 6-point lead. It's not enough. I mean, you've got to go score again. And you want to keep giving the ball back to Brady. I mean, basically you're going to get what you deserve.
No, yeah, completely. And especially with the way that they handled that last possession right before halftime, they take a knee with 55 seconds left and a couple of timeouts, and you're just sitting there thinking to yourself, you cannot do that against New England. If you can put up 3 or at least move the football a little bit, give yourself some confidence for the second half or whatever, you've got to do it. It was almost like they were waving the flag way too early there in that situation, and obviously New England does what they do. Tom Brady does what he does. Now we're talking about New England back in the Super Bowl. Let me ask you one more thing here, Brian, and then I'll let you go for today. Sportsbook Radio, you talk to a lot of sportsbook directors. It feels to me like the entire catalog of props is coming out a little bit earlier here this year than I recall in years past.
Well, I would say maybe for a couple of reasons. Many of them that are coming out are just the tried and true. Will there be a team that scores 3 consecutive times? Will there be a score in the final 2 minutes and a half? I mean, the generic ones they are what they are. Some places have had those up forever. I would say that many of the guys may have actually cheated during the week, and I know this has happened in the past because it is such a daunting task for these guys to get all this stuff up that they probably flat out went and started and did all the majority of their Patriots props and had the lion's share of those done. And if you wanted to sit there and say there wasn't a great difference between Philly's defense and Minnesota's defense, and they were probably already working on individual player props for the Patriots because they were 7.5-point favorites in the game. So they probably got a running head start on a lot of this stuff just on the premise that New England would be in the game. That might be one of the reasons why.
Yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense. I'm sure that you'll talk with those people on Sportsbook Radio here throughout the week, and then also you do a great job with Vegas Hockey Hotline. How can people tune in for those programs?
Yep, AM 1400 KSHP. Shows are archived at sportsbookradio.com. And it's a wild couple of weeks for us. The next 2 Thursdays we'll be out at Sunset Station doing the shows with Chuck Esposito, and then this Friday is our annual prop show over at the Superbook where Jay Cornegay does an amazing job. We'll be there doing 2 hours of props. All the props come out Thursday night. Friday morning we'll talk about the line moves. on the props and really dive into them. And then the following Friday, we'll be back at the Superbook, and that'll be a lot of fun. Former Mayor Oscar Goodman's coming by with the Showgirls, which doesn't mean a lot because it's radio. At least I get to look at the Showgirls. But it'd be a fun couple of weeks. It's funny, yesterday I said at the beginning of the show, all right, instead of saying, hey, here's the start of a new week, it's the start of 2 weeks because it bleeds together. And the reality of it is, by the time we get the next Wednesday or Thursday, you're just going, please play the game. I'm sick of talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, all the same angles being talked about here for basically 9 straight days on Bang the Book Radio. But make sure you're heading over to BangTheBook.com, checking out Brian's videos that he does for us, and also following him on Twitter at Brian Blessing. Brian, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us, buddy, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, Adam. Next time, get a Bocce's Pizza, buddy.